Greetings everybody around the world, wherever you may be. You're very welcome to this edition of Capricorn TV. This is your host James Swagger, and in just a moment I'm going to be talking to Spencer L. Cross about Monatomic Gold for about an hour or so. And this is a new platform for me. Capricorn TV will be out in the field interviewing authors and speakers. And like today, we'll also be doing video call interviews. Been looking forward to this one for quite a while now. Spencer L. Cross has wrote an awesome book. He's going to tell us all about it. Before we get into that, you can head over to jamesswagger.com. You'll find the links there for Capricorn TV and radio, dedicated web pages. Everything I do is hosted there. All the social media links are there for Capricorn TV and radio. So, let me tell you about today's author. Spencer Cross is the author of The Great Pyramid, A Factory for Monatomic Gold, as well as a contributor to The Approaching Singularity, The Genesis of Creation by S. Jason Cunningham. Cross was a real estate investor up until July 2012, when he was thrust into the field of alternative history after receiving information in his dream state that was so crucial to understanding the soul's journey through time and space. It's at this point he quickly divested out of his entire real estate portfolio to free himself up to the pursuit and truth of humanity's past and its potential future. The subject of the Great Pyramid of Giza has intrigued Cross since he was a boy. When in 92, he visited Egypt with his family. After his visit to the Giza, a mystery of the pyramid began to splinter in his mind, which captivated and enthralled him to this day. A breakthrough came through when Cross was researching an amazing substance called monatomic gold, or white powder gold. What he soon discovered was the same fundamental requirements necessary for the chemical reaction in breaking down large gold molecules into gold nanoclusters were all present in the design of the Great Pyramid. Cross has combined evidence from several popular modern theories to demonstrate this amazing series of reactions. And in the book he presents circumstantial evidence for why this substance was being manufactured, and how and why it is beneficial to all of us. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Welcome to Capricorn TV, Spencer.
Well, thanks, James. Thank you for having me today. I'm very excited. This is my first interview, so congratulations to you for being the first to interview me, and please bear with me while I knock the rust up as we go.
No problem, brother, no problem. You know, I've spoken a couple of times to you, Spencer. You're a lovely guy. I love what you're doing. I love your research. It's cutting edge. It's nice to see somebody being thrust into the world of alternative history. I think that's what happens to all alternative historians, Spencer. You just get thrust into it for some bizarre quirk of fate or circumstance. Every alternative historian I speak to, it's like it's not what they wanted to do, it's not what they planned to do, and as a result, they end up doing it for some strange reason. But I will say I've had a few authors on the show, Capricorn Radio. Today we're on Capricorn TV for its first launch, but on the radio shows I've had a few authors talking about monatomic gold for a variety of reasons, and so it's something I'm slightly familiar with. I'm not an expert on, and I don't think a lot of the listeners will be experts, but a lot of people are kind of familiar with it. But it's like everything in the alternative history that people get these names thrown about and don't really grasp what this whole stuff is. So, I mean, give us a definition of monatomic gold, Spencer. I mean, what is this stuff like? I know what it is, but for the listeners too, we want to understand what this stuff is. So give us the science of this stuff.
Well, it actually goes by several different names. People who are familiar with it, monoatomic gold seems to be the title that I found on my own as I was researching it. The element gold, of course, goes by AU on the periodic table, and it's a very inert substance. It's very difficult to get it to react with anything else. It doesn't corrode on its own. So if you want to do something with it, you have to have some purpose. But some of the names that you would find it called would be, of course, monoatomic gold, monatomic gold, white powder gold is another one. Ormus gold would be another one. And then, of course, the ancient Egyptian term for it would be mufkat, which would be MFKZT. And we typically like to put it in all capital letters. And what that word actually means is, what then is it? And that that raises questions all on its own. That why would the Egyptians give it a question instead of a title? So I found that quite interesting as I was going along. But basically, the way you make monatomic gold, because you kind of need to make it. It doesn't just appear on its own naturally. But what you do is you start with a fairly large molecular cluster of several atoms that are held together by metal bonds or metallic bonds. And what you want to do is you want to try to break apart some of these bonds, these metallic bonds, that give it its metallic property. If you notice, with most 24 karat gold, what you can do is you can actually hammer out an ounce of gold into several hundred square feet of thin flakes, or as what we would call gold leaf. And it's such a thin, malleable material that you can coat large surface areas with it. It's pretty amazing. But once you break it down and get it out of that metallic state, it tends to try to take on some very strange properties, not unlike stone or ceramic of some kind. And if you grind it up into a powder, it's even lighter and fluffier than talcum powder. So you're taking something that's one of the heaviest elements on the periodic table, and you're grinding it up, breaking it up, and getting rid of the metallic bonds. And now all of a sudden, it kind of floats around, and it has its own anti-magnetic properties, anti-gravitic properties. So it has some very, very strange properties once you get it out of that metallic state. And in order to do that, what you have to do is you have to take it from a large crystal, which would be somewhere around 20 to 30 atoms in one molecule, that can be considered a metallic property crystal of gold. And then you break it up into as close as you can get to one atom at a time, while it's either suspended or just in a powder state. And it's very difficult to do that. It's not something that's easy to do. And another thing that's interesting about it is that once it's in that state, it's very difficult to test whether or not it is actually gold. You need some very special equipment to do so. And that's something that David Hudson, in his research, was able to identify. So all of these things kind of caught my attention as, wow, this is something special. You're taking something that's a noble metal and is very inert and uncorrosive or non-corrosive, and you're making it into a very special substance that has its own unique properties that have nothing to do with its original state.
Wow, I mean, just from a scientist's perspective, I mean, just even in terms of just the raw science, I mean, it's such a special substance like gold on its own, in its metal state. I mean, in electronics industry, I mean, if we could make, all our circuit boards out of gold, it would be better. It's just expensive, this stuff doesn't decay. All the gold that's in existence from ancient times is still in existence today. It doesn't decay. It's bizarre, I think my first route into this was the work of Lawrence Gardner, which I know you're familiar with, and I maybe just talk a little bit about him. Has he inspired you in any way? Because he's the one that I remember the muff cut from, and I think Lawrence, his presentation, fascinating as it is. I mean, I think it's still on YouTube. I mean, I welcome the listeners to look it up, but that was one of the first times I heard about monatomic gold, and I just, wow, I went, this is something to research. This is fascinating, and I've had a variety of people on the show now, and a lot of people try to produce this stuff. Maybe just tell us about Lawrence. Has he influenced you in any way, or?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I actually was not introduced to Lawrence's work until the tail end of putting this whole thing together. I actually discovered him as I was coming up with the title for the book, and I was almost done with the book as I discovered him. And I found some YouTube videos that you were touching on, and I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in this subject. You need to watch some of his videos if you can't get his book. His book is quite expensive. I actually looked it up. It's like $90-something for even a used paperback, but that's because it's a collector's item now due to his passing. But and of course, we wouldn't expect to see any more work coming from him, and that's going to cause something like that is considered to be a work of art, in my opinion, to go up in price. So it's actually on my list of books to read right now. I wish I would have been introduced to his work ahead of time, but there are other people that are involved in this field that I wouldn't say are quite as knowledgeable as Lawrence Gardner, but quite close. And you can come to the same conclusions that I have without having to use his work. But he is an amazing supplement to this research, and I would definitely I would recommend anyone reading his book as well as taking a look at his videos. But he's the one that I identified that muff cut was highly popular back in ancient times in Egypt, and you'll find that he's the one that identified that the triangle, and this is something that we'll touch on later, but the triangle cone sitting in a dish in some of these hieroglyphics, that is the word or the identification for white powder gold.
Wow, fascinating. I mean, Lawrence was a very interesting character. I mean, he was, in contact with some very influential people, maybe secret societies. I'm not sure. But he was in contact with some very important, influential people, very wealthy people. He was, involved with artifacts and rare books and dealing in all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. He was he was. I guess he was present of a lot of knowledge. Is what I'm trying to say. Or privileged to a lot of knowledge. The ordinary soul might not be. And saying that, I actually have read that copy of that book. It's a fascinating piece of work. My important thing about Lawrence was that he's able to connect it with the ancient Egyptians, which is great, because that's why I jumped on the show for you today, Spencer, because I haven't heard anybody talk about ancient Egypt and monatomic gold until today, and this is why we're here to talk about your book. So you have my full attention, Spencer. You have my full attention today for that reason, because everybody else talks about monatomic gold and they don't really link it up in too many ways. But here we have a book today, The Great Pyramid, a factory for monatomic gold. And it's wonderful. Before we get into the book, Spencer, tell me about you. Why the fascination with, I presume it's a fascination, or if not an obsession. When I get into a subject to write or research about, it's an obsession to me. It just takes over. I want to know more about it. Is it research to you? Is there a personal touch to this, or?
Well, I did not intend to write about this at all. I was just basically looking up information on my own accord because I had some health issues starting a couple of years ago. I was diagnosed with something called ulcerative colitis, and if anyone's familiar with that, it's a very uncomfortable disease to have. It has to do with the bowels, and it's really not something fun to have. So I was kind of diagnosed with this incurable ailment, and so I started to realize that this was something that wasn't going away. And not only that, but the prescription that I was told that I needed to take almost indefinitely, called Asacol, is $600 a month. So if you can imagine, a Mercedes-Benz, monthly payment to go towards medication is quite a daunting task, or even a mortgage payment. I mean, it was significant, and it really hit me hard in the wallet.
You need to move to the UK, Spencer. We got free medical over here.
Hey, apparently we're going down that route too, but I'll follow up on that in just a second. But as what I realized is when I first was paying for this, it was about $50 a month. And then as the Obamacare situation started to rear its nice, pretty head, it got more and more expensive with every single time that insurance was renewed, because they just didn't want to carry people who on the insurance plan that had this affliction, because they knew that the prescription was too expensive. So I started doing some research on, what could I do that would be an alternative treatment to this, because I honestly could not afford to pay this by the time that it would be, coming completely out of pocket. So what I found was something called turmeric root. And turmeric root was an anti-inflammatory, and that's very similar treatment to what this was, which was basically a concentrated ibuprofen with a special casing around it to make sure that it would survive the passage through the stomach. So after taking turmeric, I noticed that I was starting to heal a little bit more, and I would heal more than I would with the prescription. So I switched completely over, stopped taking the prescription altogether, which is by my doctor. He told me that I would never stop taking this medicine and that there was no alternative. So after I started taking the turmeric, I started to see some significant results. The symptoms were starting to go away. They weren't completely gone, but they started to go away.
Sure.
But then the turmeric started to get expensive because I was trying to take an extract, and the extract is quite expensive as well. So then it kind of led me further down the rabbit hole of the holistic health, and that is when I stumbled on Monatomic Gold and all of its anti-inflammatory properties as well.
Wow.
And so I made that switch. I switched from the turmeric to the Monatomic Gold, and I bought a naturally occurring Monatomic Gold from a meteorite impact.
So this is a personal journey for you.
It really was. It really was. And it continues to be a personal journey with me, as we'll get into it in just a minute. But yes, it was personal, and it started with my own personal health. And when I finally did make that switch, what I did was I stopped taking the turmeric. So it was like, I stopped taking the prescription, and then I stopped taking the turmeric, and then flipped all the way over to the Monatomic Gold, which occurred naturally from meteorite impact zones. And it was quite an energetic experience, to say the least.
Really?
I mean, it was, not only did it alleviate my symptoms completely within 2 weeks of taking it. I mean, I was taking a significant amount. I mean, I did found out, like, okay, well, what's the maximum amount I can take without, having any side effects? And I was discovering there really weren't a lot of people that were having any side effects, except for what they described as spiritual experiences. And I was like, hey, bring it on. I'll take a spiritual experience over this malady any day. So I just kept increasing my dosage. And within 2 weeks, James, it was gone. All of my symptoms were completely gone. And that's the moment when I realized that I had something special here, and I wanted to know more about it. And I just kept learning more and more. Another side effect, so to speak, that occurred while I was taking this was, and I noticed this about the second night, a little bit the first night, but the second night, I would take about 1/8 of a teaspoon at a time throughout the day, and it would be first thing in the morning, and then throughout the day, and then. But what I did differently after reading something about what these people who were taking it, what they suggested was I doubled up my dose, like right before I went to sleep. And this is very strange. This is one of the side effects that occurred to me. As I was falling asleep, I noticed that I wasn't drifting off to sleep and then going into a dream state that I would normally forget and then struggle to remember as I woke up. What would actually happen was that I would just slowly transition into a sleep state, completely awake and aware, and then go through like a kaleidoscope of colors and experience, and then I would begin dreaming. So I wouldn't fall asleep and then dream and then struggle to remember the dream when I woke up. I would just transition straight into the dream state. I would go straight into REM without falling asleep, and I found that extremely odd. And it was, I would learn a lot from my dreams. Some dreams were slightly prophetic, but mainly it was just a normal dream. But I would just transfer right into a dream, and that really caught my attention. And that, again, between the healing and that experience,
I think that's your
that
pineal
really jumped me in.
Sorry,
Yeah, that pushed me in there.
Sorry, do you think that's your pineal gland activating instantaneously?
Well, based on what I'm reading about the pineal gland, that would make a lot of sense, because from what I understand, when you go into a dream state, you are activating your pineal gland. I would venture to say you're kind of squeezing it just like you would any other gland. And it's emitting melatonin, which helps you fall asleep, obviously, and then DMT. But see, now that you just asked that question, what I'm wondering is maybe it was kind of kicking me into the DMT state and forgetting to give me the melatonin first. Or maybe it was just kind of doing both at the same time. Whereas normally I would imagine that you would get a dose of melatonin first out of your pineal gland and then eventually the DMT. So maybe I was getting both at the same time. It sure felt like it, I can tell you that.
The reason I ask you is it's funny because I've had DMT and I've had ayahuasca, both separate settings, separate incidences, separate circumstances, and I've also had moments where I have like a pineal gland activated dream state, something that you just described, without anything like ayahuasca or DMT, but it's very like something that happens on DMT, but very short-lived, very momentary, and I've literally had 2 on the weekend, but maybe that's remnants of an ayahuasca experience, or, maybe that's because the pineal gland gets activated and it finds it easier to do that. I don't know. I have a whole list of questions with the pineal gland that I haven't answered, but you maybe look into doing ayahuasca, Spencer. Not trying to advocate the use of it in any way, but I mean, DMT, I wouldn't push on anybody. I wouldn't tell anybody to go and take it. It's pretty intense. It's pretty short-lived. It's pretty vicious in a way in its intensity. But the ayahuasca is probably more natural in the shamanic setting. But there's a lot of people use ayahuasca for many things, from physical ailments to mental ailments of depression and, bipolar, or all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. It's as well as just people with guilt or people with lack of empathy. It's this wonder substance. So it's just the way you're describing that. It's like a pineal activation thing, and maybe the monatomic gold helps you do that too. I mean, it's probably just another wonderful substance that we're trying to explore. I guess talk about some of the benefits, because you are well researched in this stuff. If you have this personal attribution to seeking this out for medical reasons, you obviously are more qualified to talk about monatomic gold than I am. But I mean, for me and the listeners, tell us about the benefits of monatomic gold. What can it do health-wise? What can this stuff do for us?
Well, anyone who does research on monatomic gold will find that they can find a lot of stuff online about it. But what I can do is I can share my personal experience with it, and I've had some pretty significant things happen. In addition to the healing aspect and the dream state, another thing would be I like to work out quite a bit, but what keeps me from working out as much as I want to is going to be the lactic acid buildup that you have, and that a lot of that gets carried over into the next day. And me being as my age now, it gets retained. It stays retained for a longer period of time. And so I would take 2 to 3 days sometimes to recover from some of the workouts. But after I started taking the monatomic gold, James, I mean, I could wake up the next day and have exactly the same workout all over again. I would regain all of my strength. I would have absolutely no muscle soreness, no fatigue whatsoever. Shortness of breath would be completely non-existent. So those are, I mean, just from a workout standpoint, that it was just completely amazing. I could not believe it. It was just one of the things that I did not find online that would be outside of the scope of research of, let's say, David Hudson or some of the other people who have been taking this substance, or know people who've taken this substance. But I mean, that took me by complete surprise. I just could not. I couldn't imagine just getting up the next day and then feeling like I could have another 2 to 3 hour workout where I completely max out on every rep. I mean, it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. That would be one thing. Another thing is, as I was doing some of this research, I was discussing this with my family. And growing up, I remember having a grandmother on my dad's side who had severe rheumatoid arthritis. And she could not find a thing. I mean, she was taking all kinds of anti-inflammatories, Tylenol, ibuprofen, prescription strength stuff that I can't remember the name of. I mean, it was years and years and years ago. But one of the things I heard that she did from my dad was, when I was discussing monatomic gold, he said, "You know what? You know, your grandmother, she traveled to Mexico and she had some special treatments, and one of the things she took was something called colloidal gold. And colloidal gold is similar to monoatomic gold from what I can find out. I'm sure people have heard of colloidal silver. That's kind of used as an antibacterial ointment, and as well as people ingest that as well. People add it to their water too to help disinfect it. But colloidal gold was kind of, as we'll get into in a few minutes with the creation of monoatomic gold, it's kind of like the last step that you get to with this substance before you reach that white powder state. And it's not actually white, it's actually black or a deep violet or purple. And the problem, it ended up causing some problems with her. She had to kind of take breaks and then start taking it again. It was working a little bit while she was taking it, but she would have to kind of stop, restart, because she was having some toxic effects. And the toxic effects are, no matter what metal you're taking as a supplement, there's a certain point where you should not take any more, as long as it's in a metallic state. If it has some of the metallic bonds left over, it still holds those metallic properties, and it's not going to be a good thing for your body to ingest large amounts over a long period of time. And so that's what she had to do. She had to kind of back off, start again, back off, start again. And it's still, the reason why is because it still had some of that metallic bond. So if she was able to find someone who was able to take that a step further and get it out of the colloidal state and into the monoatomic, or a better term would be the white powder state, then she probably could have taken a lot more. Wow. But she was able to have some pretty beneficial effects from it. She just stopped because it was, cost prohibitive to be one, and then not having the ability to continue to take it at the dosage that she wanted to kind of kept her from being able to continue on with that.
So Spencer, if we're here talking about monatomic gold, you're clearly well versed in this stuff. I have to tell the listeners, by the way, because I didn't say, you've got a Bachelor in Science. But what I want to know is, what is a Bachelor of Science doing working in real estate all these years? What were you doing to yourself?
Oh man, well, my Bachelor of Science was actually in finance. So in business. So actually up until 2012, I was in banking for many years, selling mortgages for several years. Then I got out of that from selling mortgages and started investing in real estate outside of that and on my own, and completely got out of the lending arena. I became a borrower instead of a lender, which was an interesting side to be on, since I spent a lot of time trying to lend money to people. Now I'm borrowing money from banks because, hey, I figured out how to do it. So, that's kind of the route that I went on. And then through some meetings and some interesting acquaintances and friends that I ran into along the way through the family, I kind of got kicked out of that arena, so to speak, just by my own conscience. And a couple of different things happened. One was a chance encounter with someone who was very enlightened and helped me get out of that mind frame, to begin to get out of that mind frame. And then secondly, I had some dreams that seemed to be unusual, and I was having some, I guess one way to put it would be past life experiences that were kind of telling me that there's more to this than just the endless accumulation of wealth started to eat me alive. And I was, I think that's where the ulcerative colitis, reared its ugly head, was because of the stress of trying to protect all the money. Just was getting too much. And so I started to back off from that.
If you don't mind, Spencer, please tell the audience about how you woke up to the truth movement in terms of what somebody told you about the banking cartels.
Oh, well, I actually can guide people to a book, and this person I know very well. The person's name is S. Jason Cunningham, and they wrote a book called Smoke and Mirrors. And I would highly recommend it. And this is something that we can get into a little bit later if you want to as well. And you might want to think about having her on this show as well. But I'll give you the contact information and everything for that. But she knows just about anything you could possibly need to know about fractional lending, some of the banking cartels, how they interact with not only our government, but global governments, and all the way up to the International Bank of Settlements. and the monetary fund. So there are a lot of things a lot of information regarding that was kind of fed to me. But what you'll see is once you read that book, for you and your listeners, you will start to learn some of the same things that I was shown.
Wow.
But you'll see that. We get a lot of information about these banks that were performing fractional lending, and do you think that we should get into fractional lending, or I can just kind of share my interesting tidbit of information that I was given?
Maybe towards the end of the show we will. But
okay.
Just share the tidbit, I suppose, because I'm going to get into the Great Pyramid in a minute.
Okay, yeah. So we'll come back to that, but let's just say that, even though there are certain rules with fractional lending, some of the banks were not actually following the guidelines for the fractional lending rules, not to mention the fact that fractional lending by itself is a farce and annoying, to say the least.
Exactly. Wow. Okay, let's talk about the Great Pyramid, because that's what we're here to talk about. Well, we're here to talk about monatomic gold and the Great Pyramid. I love the ancient Egypt and the Great Pyramid and anything to do with ancient Egypt. I just love exploring it. It captivates me. It just captivates me in a way, and it's like, I love alternative theories because we don't have enough of this. There's not enough alternative theories out there, because out of the midst of alternative theories, truth will eventually rise to the surface. Now, I'm not saying everybody's right with their alternative theory, but each one's equal to their own opinion, and that's probably why they are alternative, because they're not proven yet. But, out of the ashes, something will always rise. I always believe in that, give us the premise of the Great Pyramid monatomic gold theory, as you have outlined in the book.
Sure. Yeah, and just like you said, I'm not saying that I have the end game here and I have all the answers. But what I will say is that based on some of the most prominent recent research with regards to the Great Pyramid, I think that this is something that will mesh with a lot of some of the later theories that are, if you think about the theories that go further and further into the past, you're getting closer and closer to the truth. And that's something that I want to point out with my theory, is that, the pyramids, if not the Great Pyramid, just even by itself, we have to, in order to even consider this theory, you have to understand that it was not built when Egyptologists, or at least traditional Egyptologists that you would find in Cairo and in Egypt, it's not as young as they say it is. It's much older than that. And I'm sure you've seen this, and you have people on your show, and you will continue to have more people on your show that will have more and more proof and evidence that points towards the fact that the pyramids are much older than we are willing to admit. So, we have to get over that hurdle. And, I would imagine that since I'm on Capricorn Radio with you, and you have a lot of theories that put these monoliths and into the ancient past, that I'm in good company here, but we really have to get over that silly hurdle that it was built for Khufu or Cheops, because there's just no evidence that actually shows that that's there. There might be some graffiti, wink and nod here and there that points towards the fact that they were there at the time in the ancient past, but it's still not far enough into the past.
How far back, Spencer, do you think then?
I would have to say that I would agree with some of John Anthony West's work, that you're talking tens of thousands, not just 10,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago, as that Turkey site was labeled. What is the name of that? It's Göbekli Tepe. It's kind of hard to pronounce, but I think I might be close to it. But that's 10,000 BC. But again, I don't think it's far enough back. Jonathan Anthony West mentions that it was built in the age of Leo, because you have the Sphinx was probably built around the same time. But the problem with just putting it 12,000 years back, or 11 or 10,000 years back, as some popular authors state, is that now you're looking at the end of the age of Leo, and there's a lot of chaos that was going on Earth at that time. Sure. And he poignantly says that you need some stability, you need some calmness and some wisdom to be involved in erecting some of these structures. Mm-hmm. And towards the end of the age of Leo, we're looking at the Ice Age, we're looking at tumult, We're looking at all kinds of chaos going on at that time. So I just can't see that we would have the patience as a human race to build, something that significant towards the end of the age of Leo. So somewhere between there and the beginning of Leo would probably be a more accurate, point to kind of plant the flag.
My only addition to that, Spencer, is because I don't get to talk about this to many people, but when they do, I just say, look at this though, right? Because it is aligned to true north, yeah? And this is Mr. Engineer coming out. I don't think this means very much, but it is something worthy to mention. And, it is aligned to true north to within 3/60ths of a degree. And Greenwich Mean Time is 9/60ths of a degree. So it's 3 times more accurately aligned than Greenwich Mean Time that we have done with lasers. And I'm not joking when I say lasers. Greenwich Mean Time is aligned with lasers, okay? Sight measuring lasers. And we can't even, build a modern observatory more accurate than the Great Pyramid. So my point is, that's how accurate it is. It's extremely accurate to true north. Now the point is, the axis of the Earth shifts. It does a wobble. There's several wobbles in the Earth. There's the Chandler wobble and the precession of the equinox. Now, I don't actually like going past the Great Flood, because then you're talking tilts of the axis. Because why would it have after so many years still be true north? Now, how many thousand years? I mean, that still allows it to go probably to the Great Flood. But like you say, there was cataclysms then. There's also the problem is that it's built on another base, and that the base of the pyramid could be, the Leo statue, the Leonine Sphinx could be different age to the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid could be rehashed and rebuilt over the base, and there's a few things in that thing. But I just say look at that as well. So that's
to your point, and you would be more versed in this based on your work with Newgrange and your megalithic research. But if you're using the precession of the equinox, I mean, would it not, go through the entire cycle and come back to true north, or would it start drifting away and never come back to true north? That would be the question I have for you. What do you think?
You like John Anthony West, this is a very good point as well. Like John Anthony West would say, it would have to go at least one full precessional cycle. So
that's a long time ago.
But you have to add on 26,000 years plus the drift. I mean, so it could be going back to, say, 9,000 BC plus a full precessional cycle.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a long time, though. It's a long time.
It is a long time, and I'm not saying that that's the truth and that's the reality of it, but there's a lot of cartouches and signatures and discussion, so to speak, that West would even point to that shows the individual rulers that would go back, 36,000 years.
There's the King's List that add up to like ridiculous amount of time, but they just brushed that off, the Egyptologists, and that's a very important piece of evidence too. I should say it's actually to do with the obliquity of the ecliptic and the Chandler wobble as well, so it's not just the precession. That's why I say that, because the obliquity of the ecliptic is a 40,000 year cycle, which basically, if you take Newgrange, for example, the sunbeam originally penetrated and hit the exact back of the chamber, and as it hit the back chamber, it was probably more directly aligned, precisely dead center, and now it's slightly off, only because of the 5,000 years, and that's to do with the slight change in the wobble of the Earth. So this drifting axis, as it's called, this migration of the axis. As a matter of fact, that's how we can actually calculate some ancient maps, because that the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn will drift and migrate a known rate per year. So, it's an effective tool, but you have to put it into context too. So, it could also go like another full cycle, as you say, and it's a whole grey area, like. But I'm open to it. I'm very, very open to it. I'm not rubbishing it in any way. I think it's fascinating, and I love John Anthony West's work and his theories, like. But you got to put it with the context too, like you say, Spencer. When you put it with the King's List, the list of kings, like, But I'm open to the suggestion that, ancient Egypt goes back to Atlantis. I'm an Atlantis hunter. I'll fully confess to that right now, Spencer. I'm an Atlantis hunter. But I think it goes back to at least Atlantis and maybe more. But there's nothing to say that the Great Pyramid could be recycled or reused or in many ways.
Well, this is not something that I really talk about in my book, but it's a fun conversation piece for me, and I think you would be a little bit more versed in coming up with this. But I smell a side project. Maybe that's something that we could work on later. But
Wow.
I definitely think it's older than 5,000 years. So when it was built. Before that, it is really going to be speculation.
I mean,
But
just on that note, before we get into the theory, because I really want to get into the monatomic gold now, but I mean, there's also Charles Hapgood's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Charles Hapgood, but he talks about the axis of the Earth shifting dramatically. Rand Flemath would also talk about this as well. I've had Rand on the show, but basically that Antarctica is shown underneath the ice with ancient maps, and also Siberian woolly mammoths are frozen with fresh buttercups in their belly, which means they couldn't walk out of there, Spencer. So maybe the axis of maybe Antarctica got shoved into the South Pole at the same time a landmass got shoved into a Siberia. One goes into the South Pole, the other one goes towards the North Pole, and that the axis of the Earth might have shifted dramatically over about 2,000 miles, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 miles. A few problems with that theory. Einstein actually liked that theory as well. So, but that also upsets what I just said. So I've many kind of avenues of pursuit. I think maybe a dramatic shift and the Earth crust displacement could maybe explain a few things. But again, that all has to have happened, and then the Great Pyramid built afterwards. That's the key thing. So then that basically means the flood basically was the precursor to the Great Pyramid, and when that was, I think I like to put the flood at 10,000 BC because of the glacial upset that you're talking about on the planet. So I like to personally, I just like to think that the Great Pyramid came after the flood, and that the flood was 10,000 BC by derivation of thought. But we're off topic. So let's talk about monatomic gold and the Great Pyramid, because this, for me, is a really sound theory, and it's something that really explains. I think personally this thing is a monster. This Great Pyramid is a monster. It was used to make something, to do something. It was, also encoded with mathematics and all sorts of wonderful marvels. And I had a conversation the weekend. I was saying, why is there so much stuff encoded into the pyramid? Acoustics, astronomy. And I went, my answer is, it's a standard. It's an absolute standard. Because you could, if you were so intelligent to build this machine, you would show off. It's not really even showing off, Spencer. I mean, if you were so philosophically, harmonically tuned to nature, and you had all this mathematics, and you had all, why not incorporate it into, set it as a standard and say, this is what we can do, if you had that knowledge, if you had that.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And what's going to happen is if you're making the pyramid or creating the pyramid to perform a function, which is what I'm suggesting, and it's a precise function that requires very, very precise amounts of ingredients down to the drop, even from that scale and that large scale, you're going to need some perfect math. Your angles are going to need to be perfect. Your ropes are going to need to be a very specific length without any error whatsoever. If you're trying to charge certain aspects of your substance that you're trying to create with frequency, what are you going to charge it with? Are you going to charge it with a harmonic frequency, or are you going to charge it with a disharmonious frequency? And you could be off by a fraction of an inch and create a huge problem. So yeah, I would totally agree with you that they don't even have to boast to say, hey, we know how to do this. It's just that they're using their knowledge of these measurements, these megalithic measurements, in order to create something that they want in the end, which would be, in my opinion, with this, it could be a specific type of substance, which would be monoatomic gold. But I don't really get into the numbers, the specific measurements, but I would say that based on what I'm seeing and how I've made this white powder gold myself, how unyielding it is and how precise you have to be, and you cannot make any mistakes. Based on just that discovery, yes, you need some very specific measurements, and you need to be well versed in math just to try to make a machine that's going to be automated to do this. So, we're not far off on that. In fact, we're probably on the same page when it comes to the numbers and the math. But, for me, just speaking for myself, that's kind of above my pay grade right now, and we'll have to get into the numbers later. But what I can do is tell you, based on my own discovery on how to make this, I can show you, and we can start with step one if you want to. Let's just say that, prefacing this theory, we have to assume that the Nile River was actually closer to the pyramid than it is today. In fact, what I'd like to say is that it was probably meandering all the way up to the causeway, if not into the causeway, so that you could irrigate quite easily up to the base of the pyramid into something which we would consider that there was a moat around the pyramid that we would need to use. So, if we can kind of assume that the Nile was closer to the pyramid, then it's quite easy to show this. Otherwise, then you're talking about a bucket brigade for water, and then you're all the way back to the, building the pyramids with logs, ropes, pulleys, and I just don't,
Well, I think Dr. Carmen Bolter pretty much showed that in a pretty acceptable manner that, the migration of the Nile has happened from satellite topography. It's in the Pyramid Code. If anybody wants to check that documentary out, I definitely recommend it. I mean, she's an awesome lady, an awesome researcher. She's been on the show twice, and I just aired the second show the other day, and I think she's pretty much showed that, though. I would pretty much accept that as fact. You can see it, and the thing about that is, though, that also backs up what you say in saying that, we're going back into deep antiquity because, deep antiquity, because the migration of the Nile is a geological event, where the meandering of a river takes a long, long, long time. It's just like the water weathering on the Sphinx takes a long, long time. This all adds up to before 3000 BC and beyond. So.
Well, and that's also assuming that the meandering takes a long time. What if it all occurred during this cataclysmic event? I mean, it could have all happened at one time or in a very short period of time. And they could have been building these structures all the way up until the point where the cataclysm occurred, and then it happened quickly, and then all of a sudden, poof, the Nile's over here now instead of over there. So, I think a crustal shift, that, like you were talking about, could very well describe, something that happened quite quickly, although it was a long time ago, but it could have happened quite quickly to cause flooding. It could have caused some very quick erosion if there was some fast-moving water. And then also the shifting of the Nile would have occurred if, let's say, the earth rose up a little bit, dropped in certain areas. So, I mean, I can see how it could have happened quite quickly. It doesn't have to, I'm not going to take a dogmatic approach and say that it's a geological process that takes tens and tens, if not millions of years. It could have been something that was quite sudden, and I'm open to that.
Sure. I'm just looking at step one here. I love schematics of the Great Pyramid. You get me excited when I see schematics of the Great Pyramid. But I just pulled up step one here.
Okay, well, let's take a look at step one. And in step one, what we'll say that I like to take Christopher Dunn's work with his with his Giza power plant. He used the term guardians of the pyramid, and I would like to use that term as well. I think it's quite fitting, and that's because I'm not going to say that the people who were creating this or using this machine actually built it, but I would say that they definitely knew how to use it and were guarding its secrets as well as making sure that it was running smoothly. So in step one, we're going to look at A. And if you look at the letter A, what you'll see is that we're taking, the guardians of the pyramid are taking salt down to the pit area, and they're placing quite a bit of salt. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to describe, the way that I make white powder gold, and some other alchemists would make white powder gold. Sure. So I'm just kind of using my recipe, and we're going to walk through the mechanics of the pyramid, and we're going to show how just using even a modern creation of white powder gold can be found in the pyramid. So you put the salt into the pit. You go down the descending passageway, and you take the gold down to the pit. And then you get the guardians out, because now you're going to flush the pit with Nile River water to dissolve the salt. So then you use the moat structure to then you're either going to fill the moat until the level comes up and then the water pours down the descending passage, or you're going to go get some of the water and just pour it down there. But you're not going to need a tremendous amount of the Nile water for this first step. But the first thing you do is you dissolve the gold. So that's A. And then B, you got the Nile water in there. And then C, there's a couple of different things that you can do here if you look at C. And C is suggesting that you agitate the solution to get it to dissolve faster. But, everybody knows that if you let it sit long enough, it'll eventually dissolve in the water. But using something called a ram pump, which is the entire lower portion of the pyramid looks like a ram pump, which you can find a description of this with John Cadman. He created a pretty interesting theory and actually patented his design. And you can see a ram pump design there in the lower area. And with a ram pump, it has a couple of different functions. The first function is going to get water to flow vertically. But another side effect that Cadman doesn't really talk about in his theory, because he believes it was just a water pump used to perform a certain function. But what you'll find is that you can also put it in kind of like a pause or a resonant state, and it just kind of pulses. And so this gentle pulsing that's going on in the pit area is going to be a side effect of this ram pump. And while it's doing that, you're agitating the salt into the water, and you're able to dissolve it faster. So that's kind of like a natural stirring effect, which is what I would be doing to try to dissolve the salt.
May I just add there, Spencer, that, that's something we do in the chemistry lab. I remember we used to make copper in engineering class. We used to get the solution of copper sulfate, the salts, and put it into a liquid and just get a metal rod or a glass rod and just stir the solution. And that's a basic building block of all chemistry. You stir the solution, you agitate it. I like that. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
But you don't have to if you don't want to. You can just let it sit there for eons if you want. But
quicker
to get it going, just like you said, you want to do that. You want to agitate it. So that would make sense to me to use the ram pump and that. So, but we'll talk about how the ram pump actually moves stuff around the pyramid in a moment. But even just that tiny function of agitating in the pit area, I thought that was interesting that it meshed with it as well. So it's very useful to be able to stir it up. Okay, so and now we're moving on to D in step 1 still. Mm-hmm. And once the salt is completely dissolved, then what we do is we presume that the pit is in some way connected to the king's chamber shaft. And what we learned from Christopher Dunn's work and with the Ganterbrink's door is that there is a room behind the southern shaft that they discovered after drilling a hole in, and they used the orthoscope to look in there, and they noticed, oh hey, there's another larger room in here, but they couldn't see the end of the room. So I'm assuming that goes further, that it's not just that room at the end of the shaft, that it goes further. And I would like to suggest that it actually is connected in some way through another shaft or tube of some kind all the way down to the pit. So now we're going to activate the pit ram pump once again, and we're going to open up a valve or two, and we're going to send it up to the king's chamber, and it's going to now send the saltwater solution to rest into the king's chamber. Now, I'm not going to try to suggest I know exactly what the proportions are. How much are they making at this point? Because I'm still trying to work out my own recipe and iron out those details myself. But I can say that the global view of this is quite simple to show that it's going on. So now we're flushing the pit. Okay, so we've turned the ram pump on and we've flushed the pit, and now it's all the solution that was in there is now up in the king's chamber, and the pit is empty. Mm-hmm. So I think we can move now. E. So we've done that, and now what we're going to do is, now that it's sitting in, we're still in step 1, but while this saltwater solution is sitting in the king's chamber, now we're going to actually turn it into something called sodium hydroxide, which is a very high pH base. And this is an essential chemical that's needed. And you can actually start with salt water to make this. It's quite interesting. So in my recipe, you make sure that you supersaturate the salt into the water to where there's no more salt that can dissolve into the water. And you're sending that up to your next beaker, which is, in this case, the King's Chamber. And what you do to make sodium hydroxide, and this is quite amazing, is that you actually use an anode and a cathode, and you electrolyze the water, and the side effect that you get, the byproduct that you get, is chlorine gas on one side where it's venting out, and then what remains is the sodium hydroxide. So the only byproduct that you're getting from making this with an anode and a cathode is sodium hydroxide and chlorine gas. Now, everybody knows chlorine gas is poisonous, so you don't want to hang out in there. That's why it's protected in the pyramid. But so then the question that's probably burning on your mind is, well, how did they get an anode and a cathode in there? Well, another thing that was discovered was some iron was discovered in the King's Chamber. Mm-hmm. And then also at the end of the shafts, you'll notice that there are, on both sides, they have those copper hooks. And in Christopher Dunn's work, he says that what that is used for is kind of like a switch. So as the water level comes up, you'll see that it touches the two probes and turns the pump off. But I think it has two purposes. One is to tell you when to stop pumping the fluid. And then the second one is that once that fluid reaches up there, those two probes can now electrolyze the water, and it's on both sides. You have it on the north shaft and on the south shaft. So they can use maybe Baghdad battery technology, which we can find is quite ancient, handed down technology. They could have used electricity in some way to charge the water in that way. Mm-hmm. But it's quite possible, that there's evidence there that they're making sodium hydroxide in the King's Chamber. Wow. Now, I'm not saying this is the only purpose of the King's Chamber. There's also obviously some functionality there that's outside of making sodium hydroxide. But, the good news about sodium hydroxide is that it's not completely toxic on its own. Once you neutralize it, all you have to do is add some acid to it. Now it just becomes salt again. So, if you wanted to neutralize it quite quickly so that you could go use it for another function, it's not very hard to do that either. So, but just for the purposes of this, we're saying that sodium hydroxide is being created, and then also in turn that chlorine gas is being vented. Wow. And so that's where we get to F.
Just for the listeners, sodium hydroxide is not commonly known as caustic soda, yeah? It's like, or lye.
Lye, yeah. It's one, that would be one and the same.
We call it caustic soda over here. Like it's,
okay. I've heard that term, but we call it lye, sodium hydroxide, and then the chemical name for it would be capital N, lowercase a, uppercase O, uppercase H. So NaOH would be, the chemical term for that molecule.
It can burn the skin, yeah. It's quite nasty.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it'll tear the flesh off of your body if you let it sit there too long. So that's not something you want to mess with. And the scary thing about it is if you're mixing the crystals, like typically what I would do is I would mix crystals and water to make the lye liquid. I would start with the dry crystals, mix it with the water, and while it's dissolving in there, it makes an extremely dangerous gas. And if you breathe that in, it has absolutely no scent. All it does is start to burn your lungs. So you need to make sure that if you're going to do this, you need to make sure you have protective eyewear as well as a mask, because it's quite dangerous. So, all right. So we're making the sodium hydroxide, and now we've created a byproduct. And what is this byproduct? Chlorine gas. Now, chlorine gas was used as chemical warfare in World War I. Everybody knows, that it would sink into the trenches, and people would breathe it in, and then their lungs would basically dissolve. I think they called it mustard gas would be another name for it. They just added another chemical. so that you wouldn't have that gag reflex as you breathe it in. See, naturally, chlorine gas on its own, you're going to have a gag reflex, you're going to cough, and you're going to want to run away. Well, somehow they figured out that you could add a couple of ingredients to it, so where it disables your gag reflex and you actually breathe it all the way in. And that's what they used in World War I. It was a horrific weapon. It really was.
Yeah, it's heavier than air, and that's why it sinks into the trenches. That's why it was used. So.
Yeah, totally. So that was the byproduct. Now, you can do one of two things here. And one aspect of it is that we're still assuming that the shafts are connected to the pit. And so one thing we could do is vent it out the south side and either A, go straight into the pit and we're going to move and we'll see what happens there in step 2. Or there can be a yet undiscovered chamber somewhere on the south side of the pyramid where it could store the chlorine gas. Now, again, that part is complete speculation. I'm not saying that I have any evidence that it is there, but what I'm saying is that there's enough room for a chamber like that to be there.
Oh, yeah.
But if that's not the case and that doesn't work, then we can just move on to step 2, and I can show you how we can, in real time, make the next chemical with that vented chlorine gas.
Sure, let's do step 2. Let's have a look at this. This is interesting.
Okay, so step 2. So we made the chlorine gas, and we're either assuming that it's being stored or we're moving it throughout the shaft system. So in A, we're looking at the Guardians are pouring fresh Nile River water back into the pit. Mm-hmm. So going down the descending chamber passageway into the pit, and it's resting there. And then B, when we get to B, this is the crazy part. Okay. When the water is resting there, what I discovered is if you want to make the next step in this process, which is hydrochloric acid, what you do is you percolate chlorine gas through fresh water. And if you percolate chlorine gas through fresh water, you're decomposing that water into hydrochloric acid. So if you percolate it long enough, you're actually making hydrochloric acid, and that's what is sitting there in the pit now once you do the B part, which is venting that chlorine gas. So you're pushing that chlorine gas out of the king's chamber, and you're either taking it straight to the pit to do that, or you're storing it and then taking it to the pit. And the bottom pit well is a portion, a tube that's sticking straight up into the pit, and you can vent that chlorine gas and have it bubble straight up in there, and over a certain period of time, it makes hydrochloric acid. And to me, when I discovered that one, I was like, okay, all right, well that's step 2. I can't believe it. This is actually coming together. I was at that point, it was just a pipe dream and just a theory that's kind of floating in the cloud. But when I saw that you could make hydrochloric acid after the first step, I was like, okay, I think it's time to take it a step further and see what else matches up with this.
Wow.
So
Chris Tone mentions hydrochloric, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this is beautiful because this is where I see it tying in with Chris Tone.
Yeah, because what you do is, and when we get to that part for the Queen's Chamber, which is in step 3, we'll discuss that. But yeah, it totally matches up. So we percolate that through, and then in D, the hydrochloric solution is then, using that same ram pump, we're sending it up to the Queen's chamber, and we're letting it store in the Queen's chamber. So we're going up another shaft, we're flipping the valves, and we're going up the Queen's shaft now, and now we're letting it pour and seep into the Queen's chamber as hydrochloric acid. Which it's going to want to do that. It's going to want to go through the limestone and the granite because it's so corrosive. It's going to find a way to seep through that.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, and I'm just thinking about that, funny enough, because some of these chambers, these shafts, I should say, these shafts didn't fully go in. They had to break out the last couple of inches of block to see the shaft. They found them by testing and tapping, and they realized there were shafts, but it's porous. Limestone is porous, like, so it's, I mean, if there was chemical solutions, it would naturally come through the last few inches on its own. It would be like a little valve in a way. It would be like a natural valve having to go through the seep through the little bit of rock, coming down the shaft. But I quite like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and the funny thing is when you're dealing with these delicate alchemical processes is that you're not pouring a huge amount of chemical in there at one time to get the end result. What you're actually doing is you're going in drip by drip by drip. So while I'm making my white powder gold, I'm stirring and I'm very carefully pouring small amounts in here. And in fact, if I had some kind of eyedropper or a filter of some kind that would only let a tiny, tiny amount get in, it actually would work better. So the fact that you have this, couple inch gap between the chamber and the shaft, it actually helps this theory because you want it to go in slowly. You don't want it to all rush in at one time. So, you brought up a good point, and that's something I didn't really think about. But yes, that would make it extremely helpful. So.
Well, the granite wouldn't be porous. I mean, but then again, the granite beams in the King's Chamber are just a different layout in there. So, but the Queen's Chamber, and it's funny because there's different types of rock in there, but it would naturally seep through anyway. They probably were clever with what choice of rock they chose.
Well, maybe what we'll find is that sodium hydroxide works better with the granite, whereas the hydrochloric acid works better with the limestone.
Yeah, well, they could have left cracks for the granites as well. There's various options. Like, I'm just saying that for the actual shafts that are covered in limestone, the last bit would be porous, and that would come through. But for granite, I mean, it would sip through the cracks anyway, so it would naturally trickle through the cracks.
Mm-hmm. But either way, if it doesn't come through, of course, that's going to be a problem. But if it seeps through very slowly, that's very helpful with this alchemical process. So, that'll be something to delve into at a later date. Hopefully we get to, make a trip and actually see for ourselves how it would react. And, discoloration would be a good point to this. If we could notice corrosion of some kind with the stone and discoloration, that would help to know. But without being there, it's kind of hard to see that. So we'd have to look at other people's research for that. Yeah. So for step 2, the hydrochloric acid is in there, and now we can move to step 3 if you want. Let me know when you're ready to go to step 3, because that's where
step 3. Yeah. Okay, I'm looking at step 3 now. This looks wow. I got you. Okay, so we're back again to the cycle again. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're on, if you have my book, you'll be on page 32, on figure 12. Now we're on step 3. Yeah. So part A. Now this is where the gold comes in. Now it's time for the good stuff. Now that basically what we've done is we created the 2 major solutions that we're going to need in this reaction. We've made the sodium hydroxide first, which actually is the second chemical we use. And then we made this hydrochloric acid second, which is actually the first chemical that we use. But you needed the creation of the sodium hydroxide to even begin to make the hydrochloric acid. So making them backwards was actually necessary with this, but we're going to use them in the other order. So we go in we place the gold in the pit with some salt, because you need some salt for this reaction, because the first step is you're making gold chloride, and you need the chlorine that's with the salt to do that. So we're placing both salt and gold into the pit, and now we're letting Nile water descend the descending passage. And what we're doing here is we're dissolving just a little bit of water. It's not a tremendous amount. Just to dissolve the salt, because it's easier for the salt to dissolve with the water than it is for the first step, which is the hydrochloric acid. So get the water to dissolve the salt. Of course, your gold is not dissolving in this step at all. It's just kind of floating around and then eventually sinking to the bottom of the pit. But you're waiting, and you can agitate it again at this stage as well to get the salt to dissolve quickly once again. So then in B, after we allow the salt to dissolve, what we do is we open up the Queen's chamber valve to allow the hydrochloric acid to flow down the ascending passage, and then it hits the descending passage, and then finally hits the pit. And you don't have to. A lot of alchemists like to slowly add their hydrochloric acid, but in my experience, I've tried both, and it works either way. So just allowing the whole thing to as much of the ingredient as you want to flow, that's fine. Just let it go. And so this stage, once the hydrochloric acid hits this salt water mixture, the saline solution with the gold in it, it's now starting to break apart the salt more, as well as breaking apart the gold and starting to create a gold chloride. And this is a very yellow solution. It starts to become a very yellow solution. And what I'll do at a later date is I'll actually send you some pictures of my own work so you can see the different colors that this turns to at different stages. But at this stage, as the gold dissolves, it becomes yellow. So now you've for step 3, at this point, we have let some hydrochloric acid out. It's now dissolving the gold. At this point, we're going to assume some time has passed and some agitation has occurred, and we have completely dissolved the gold into suspension. So there's no more, gold flakes or pieces anywhere in the chamber anymore. We've now dissolved the gold, and it's in complete suspension. And at this point, you're looking at a very low pH level. You're looking at like -1 pH. And so you're not going to be consuming this in any way or going anywhere near it. And in fact, the fumes will hurt you significantly, if not kill you. So you want to, again, it's another reason why you want it to be in the pyramid and not anywhere near you, is because this also is highly corrosive in step 3. So at this point, you could do a couple different things. I add hydrogen peroxide. I have not found any evidence that they were using hydrogen peroxide to speed the process up as a catalyst, but you can if you want to. So I'm not going to rule it out, but I don't think they were using hydrogen peroxide in their recipe. So that would mean it would take a lot longer for it to dissolve the gold than it would, and so to speak, in my laboratory, where I would use a beaker and add little bits of hydrogen peroxide. It's very difficult to make that chemical, so I would kind of be surprised that they were using it. But so what we would have to assume is that more time, like a couple weeks, would go by before the gold was completely dissolved in this case.
Wow.
So in D, we're still in step 3. The gold completely dissolves, and then the solution is bright yellow. And then at this point, we can move on to step 4, and we'll start talking about the next couple steps.
Sure, I'm on step 4 now.
Okay. So this is on page 33 of the book, and we're on figure 13. So in A, what we do now is, now that the gold has had some time to dissolve, that means it's in suspension. So we're ready to mess with it. We can react with it. It's time to start, banging at this crystal and trying to break it up and getting it into smaller and smaller pieces. And the way you do this is, now you release the sodium hydroxide from the king's chamber, and it goes down the ascending passage and gets to the descending passage, and then reaches the pit. And now you slowly flip the pH from a -1 to the goal pH of a base of 10.78. Now, the reason why you throw that number out there at 10.78 pH is because something is created once you pass that 10.78 called the Gilchrist precipitate. And that's basically extracting toxic metals and turning them into precipitate that you don't really want. So if you're going to focus on just, dissolving the gold and breaking the gold apart, then your goal pH is going to be a 10.78. So that's, you let enough of that solution, that sodium hydroxide solution, which is somewhere around 13 plus pH, and you let just enough of it down to get to that 10.78 level. And where you can actually feather this off a little bit better than you can with the Queen's chamber is the antechamber. Those blocks that were controlled by levers and ropes you can actually let little bits of that solution out by lifting and dropping those slabs. So right when you get to that level where you've had the perfect amount of sodium hydroxide, then you quickly drop the slab and you cut the supply off, and you don't let all of it down. You just let enough down that you need. So that's when the pH flips. You get to the 10.78 pH in the pit. You agitate it quite a bit, and what you'll notice is the color has now changed. Depending on how well you dissolve the gold to begin with, if you dissolved it completely into suspension, there's a possibility you might have gotten it all the way to the stage where it turns purple or black. And if that's the case, then you're really, really close to your monoatomic gold solution. So that step 4, there's a couple of things going on here in step 4. The first thing, this is the first addition of your sodium hydroxide, but then what you're also going to be doing in here is in step B, and step 4 but part B, is you're releasing more hydrochloric acid to then flip it back over. So, first you dissolve the gold in hydrochloric acid, then you're flipping the pH to break apart the crystals some more with the sodium hydroxide out of the King's chamber, and then you're flipping it back over again with the hydrochloric acid back to about a 1 pH, and you're continuing to dissolve it. And what you want to do is want to flip it back and forth past neutral on one side to break apart the crystal, and then on the other side you're redissolving what you broke apart. So you're kind of, you're going back and forth, and it's like a boxing match, and you're beating the crap out of this molecule until you break open the crystal to a point where you're you're getting rid of the metallic bonds. And finally, once you've sufficiently broken it apart, you'll be able to tell by the color of this solution, when you get it to a certain color, that you've reached your goal, and the size of the molecule are as close to the white powder gold as you can get while it's in suspension. And then, but what you also notice is that while you're going through this process, you're either sitting here with an extremely acidic solution or an extremely basic solution, and neither one of those do you want to consume. I mean, I don't want to consume something that's a 1 pH or anything that's anywhere near a 10 pH. So what you need to do now is neutralize it. So as the final step in the pyramid job is to kind of feather the hydrochloric acid and the sodium hydroxide to the point where you get it to about an 8 pH. You want to get it close to neutral, but I like to get mine slightly higher than neutral, because we are inherently an acidic creature. So if you're going to consume something, you want to consume something slightly basic so that you can become neutral throughout your diet. So I kind of put it at an 8. You could neutralize it at 7 straight up if you wanted to. But either way, it's possible to do that with this. So once you neutralize it, then what you'll find is that you're sitting there with a solution that has now broken apart the gold sufficiently, as well as it's an extremely salty solution, because when you're flipping the neutral point with the hydrochloric acid and the sodium hydroxide, every time you flip, you're creating more and more salt along the way. So, that's one thing that would be a byproduct with this monoatomic gold, is that you're going to have a very salty fluid as well as the monoatomic gold mixed in. Now, the next stage that you want to work on is you want to allow this solution, this precipitate, because along the way, as you're flipping back and forth, you are breaking it apart enough to where it stops dissolving at a certain point, and it becomes a suspended precipitate. And you want to let that precipitate in the end kind of settle to the bottom of the pit. And then once it's settled, you have your super saline water on top, super saturated salt water on top, while the precipitate gold has settled to the bottom. And then you turn on your ram pump just a little bit, and then you flush that top water away. And what's left is the monoatomic gold or white powder gold at the bottom that's still kind of in a suspended fluid, but it's very easy at this point to then go in, and it's safe now that it's been completely neutralized. you can go into the pyramid at this point, go down to the pit, and harvest your monatomic gold, take it back out, and you can rinse away the salt if you want to, or you can just let it dry in the sun and use it as salt. It's up to you at this point, but at this point, the reaction's finished.
Wow, Spencer, this is powerful stuff, man. You really, really spent a bit of time with this, haven't you?
Well, when you get obsessed with something, you work it until you get satisfied that you have the answer, and that's kind of where I feel like I've reached. So hopefully other people can see that. If not, then let's work on it. And I that's my challenge to everyone out there is, if this is not the end answer, then I would like to sit with anyone who wants to try to come up with the answer. But first, let's see if this is true, and if anybody can come up with a reason why it is or is not true, then I want to hear it, because this has got my attention. That's for sure.
Wow, you got my attention too, Spencer. You really have. Like I said, I asked you to come on the show, and you asked me, and I asked you, and I said, "What's the book about?" And you told me what the name of the book, and I went, "You're on the show." It's like sometimes just the title grabs me. I know that it's going to be a good show, and I know that you've obviously applied a theory, but I like what you've taken in bits of Chris Dunn's work. I mean, the acoustics. Do you look at the acoustics, Spencer, in any way? I'm guessing the acoustics could be the mechanism.
Well, that's something that I kind of stumbled upon after I was done, and this is an ongoing work. I don't see this to be complete in any way. Just like the research for the pyramid will never end. I don't think it ever will, and neither will this research ever end. I don't think. But one thing that people do, the alchemists do when they're making this, is that they send their intent into the creation of this muff cut, into the white powder gold. They give it a function. They try to give it an etheric function, and so that when they consume it, that it's taking on that function that they gave it when they were making the substance while they were breaking the gold apart. So one of the things that I stumbled on after the book was that frequency, using sound frequency, can actually not only charge the monoatomic gold, but charging your sodium hydroxide before you apply it to the solution ends up giving it a function as well. So let's say if you wanted it to harmonize with the frequency of the Earth, then what you're going to want to do is actually charge the sodium hydroxide that's sitting in the King's chamber with a frequency. And I did see, and it's not something I really talked about in the book because I didn't really know what to do with it at the time, but Chris Dunn was saying that the King's chamber was some type of resonant device where they were sending sound that would actually resonate just like an out-of-control resonance with a bridge, like we've seen in the upstate Washington here in the U.S. back several decades ago, where the wind was blowing just right, and it had the right frequency where it actually blew apart the bridge just by having the right frequency. And in Chris Dunn's theory, he's saying that if you use those dampers, those pulleys that would lift up those stones up and down in the antechamber, what you find is that you can actually shut off all of the sound going in and out of the King's chamber. And I think that it was functional. I think it was useful for giving the sodium hydroxide some type of frequency. I think that's possible. Do I understand it completely? Absolutely not. But it does seem like it would be useful in some way.
Wow. This is powerful stuff, Spencer. This is powerful stuff.
It blew me away.
It's mind-blowing. This is mind-blowing. I mean, the good thing is that this makes sense. It makes sense all day long. I mean, you look at the diagrams, and I'm glad you provided the diagrams for the show. It was great to do this today, and to do this, and it's almost like it's like a chemistry class in a way, but it's in bite-sized chunks, and it's digestible. And I like the way you have incorporated Chris Dunn's theory and John Cadman's hypothesis, and it's tying threads together for me, Spencer. It really is. I mean, this is the beauty about alternative historians. Like, just jump on board. I welcome anybody. Just go and research stuff for your fun. Go research it for yourself first. You know, you never know what you're going to find. You know, in this day and age, Spencer, I found rock art in 2007 that wasn't even documented, and I went property. And I was stunned, you know, because you would be forgiven for thinking this is all figured out, this is all done. If you listen to anybody, this is all wrapped up and done, you know, it's all over and done with, like, you know, but it's not. It's nowhere near it, like.
No, it's not.
I'm fully convinced, though, that there was a massive amount of monatomic gold in ancient times, Spencer. I'm fully convinced of that, and it had to come from somewhere. And I think you're providing an answer for us today with your book. I really do.
Well, if they were trying to make massive amounts, we're finding, you know, that this could make a massive amount. So this could be your source. You know, I was able to find that it seems like they were finding monoatomic gold and white powder gold in other areas. There's also some temples that suggest that some of the temples were used, but none of them would have been able to produce this stuff on a massive scale like the pyramid could have. So, you know, if you're trying to say, okay, we're providing it for an entire civilization to do many things, and, you know, maybe this would be for a different show, but we could then come back and talk about David Hudson's work.
Oh, yeah.
and describe what they could use the substance for. You know, this may be where the idea of flying carpets came from, and so they were using it not only for themselves, but for many other things like construction, transportation, and many other properties, amazing properties that this stuff has. Could have been used, but if you're going to use it for all of these things, you have to produce a lot. So, you know, that's where the pyramid, I think, comes into play, is producing that lot, that huge amount that would be required to run an entire civilization, both spiritually and physically.
Wow. Fascinating. For you, then, Spencer, I mean, just what's next for you? Do you want to keep on at ancient Egypt? Do you want to keep at the monatomic gold, alternative science, maybe alternative history as well?
I think that we're just scratching the surface, you know, discovering the fact that why the pyramid was built. If it was built to make this monoatomic gold, it's just scratching the surface because, you know, then the question is, well, why did they need so much? So what I want to know is, what were they using it for? Not just all of these, you know, parables and symbols that we're finding scattered throughout Egypt saying, sure, oh, well, you're eating it here, and this pharaoh was presented it over here. That's all well and good, but that doesn't tell us its complete purpose. It just tells us that they were consuming it. So I want to know, when it comes to the monoatomic gold, at least at a minimum, I want to know what else it can do. You know, they were making it. So now I want to know why. I know why I personally would like to consume it based on our discussion earlier and how it was able to help me. And you can find stories like that all over the internet. But the thing is I want to know more. I want to know what was the reason why the ancients were producing it, and how did they know about it? Where in the world did they get this silly idea that you're going to waste 3 months trying to break apart the most precious metal on earth to make something that you're going to eat? A, you're not going to have the patience to do that, to make it even outside of the pyramid. And then B, you're going to make an entire structure that takes decades to build to make this substance. Come on. I mean, there has to be more to this than just a person consuming a little bit to mediate some inflammation and to try to have some nice dreams. James, there's something else going on here, and it's bigger than what either of us can come up with. But the thing is that this is the beginning, and we need to figure out where it ends. We probably never will figure out where it ends, but I can tell you, as we're pursuing this, you know, I invite all the listeners to try to pursue this. This is not just something that I want to keep within myself, and I want to pursue this on my own. I invite everyone to take this journey with me, because I'm telling you, there's a connection here. There's a connection between why our economy runs on gold and why the Egyptians were making white powder gold. There's a connection there. Someone is going to have some of these answers. And it might not please people when they find out some of these answers, but you know what? It's still discovering the truth. And that's what I invite people to do, is pursue the truth on this. And that's what I want to see happen, is I want to see the truth come out into the light, and I want to know why were the Egyptians making it? Number one. And number two, why aren't we using diamonds as our monetary foundation instead of gold? No, we are using gold. So there's some connection there between what we use to buy and sell goods and the ancient civilizations making gold, white powder gold, in the pyramids and in their civilization. Do I know what it is? Absolutely not. Can I speculate? All day long. But the thing is I want to find answers, and I want other people to help find some answers as well.
Wow. I remember from research that I had read that people with mental disabilities like Down syndrome and stuff had a higher IQ. Also, when the same people with those mental disabilities swim with dolphins, they have a higher IQ. Their intelligence creates because of sonar frequency. So, I mean, alternative science is really where it's all at for me. And I think there's a lot of benefits from monatomic gold. I'm a little bit dubious about the internet because it's full of stuff. I mean, it's full of probably fake monatomic gold as well as real monatomic gold. And, I think, I mean, you touch on the healthy chromosomes, and tell us a little bit this, because this is in your book too. You don't just, it's not just about, you do give some, alternative reasoning for this and a bit of background as well.
This is fascinating. Okay, when I saw this I was almost done with the book when I found this, and chills ran up my spine when I found this information about the chromosome health. Okay, there is. The hair is standing on the back of my neck right now, so I'm just waiting for it to go down. But basically, what is going on here is that there's been some research fairly recently, and I think it began after David Hudson's discoveries, because I think that some people behind the scenes in academia, as well as high up the food chain in the finance world, were getting interested in this once they discovered some of the things that he found. And what has been discovered very recently, in the past year or two, is that there are something called telomeres at the end of each person's chromosome. Everybody has chromosomes, and at the end of chromosomes are these things called telomeres. Now, they're kind of like end caps that keep your DNA inside the chromosome. And your own body's waste floating around in your fluid can damage your chromosomes, and the weakest part of your chromosome is going to be the end. So this telomere is that end cap. It's kind of like a very powerful substance that's kind of like a shield, so to speak. Now, what they're finding is that if these degrade, then that's how we age. That's your general process of aging, is when these telomeres get broken up and your DNA gets exposed. Because what happens is that your chromosomes get frayed, and now you're not going to repeat the manufacture of that specific cell. That cell is now dead. Once that telomere breaks off or dissolves or degrades, and your chromosome is now exposed, then your body will shut the repair mechanism down from that cell and kill it and flush it out of your body. So what's left over? The cell that's next to it that still has its telomere. So it's kind of like a repeating process. Over time, you lose cells. So you kind of have this cloning effect going on in your body, where we all hear about Dolly the sheep, one of the first cloned animals on Earth, and it only lived less than half the lifespan of a normal sheep. Because of the issue with the cloning. Why is that? Because you're taking a copy of a copy of a copy to then create a new cell or a new animal, and it's just not it's not held together the same way that it was in the original. The copy is just a bad version of it. And the same thing's going on with your cells, and it's going on at the beginning with your chromosomes. So maybe it came with the research with the cloning, kind of went hand in hand with this, but nonetheless they came to this conclusion that the chromosomes were being exposed. So, what is a telomere? How does it fix itself? Well, we typically will reproduce telomeres over time throughout our life, but the problem is we can't make them fast enough to keep up with the aging process, with the degradation of the telomeres. We're constantly making telomeres, but for some reason, we just are unable to keep up with that stress. And so what's happening is that there's an enzyme that actually does rebuild the telomere, and it's called telomerase. Most enzymes actually end with ASE, which kind of identifies it as an enzyme. So that's one way. If you guys want to do research on this, telomer, it's TELOMERASE, telomerase. And that enzyme is what rebuilds the telomere, which protects and shields the chromosome. Now, everything has food. So if the telomere has food or is rebuilt by an enzyme that must eat, what does the enzyme eat to produce itself? And that's where the key comes into this. And that is, it eats nanoclusters of gold. That is its main food source for this telomerase, is nanoclusters of gold. If you just eat yellow gold, the particles are not going to get small enough through your own digestive system to feed the telomerase. We actually find small enough gold powder particles to feed the telomerase, but the problem is it's like let's say it's in carrots and blueberries and similar antioxidant food that you can tell by the color of it that it actually has this material in it. Blueberries are purple. Well, part of the process of making monatomic gold gets down to that purple level. In fact, purple and black is the final stage right before you get to the white powder gold. Wow. So it's kind of like in a colloidal gold solution that you're finding inside the blueberries, and then the carrots would be kind of one step up, closer to the yellow gold stage, because the orange, brownish stage is what you're in between the colloidal gold and the original gold. So you can find it, but the problem is that GMO creation has been a problem with breaking down and diluting the monatomic gold out of the food is one suspicion that I have. But no matter how far back into the past you get to the heritage genes of these foods that we've been exposed to, that we're supposed to be eating, never in our history did it have enough monatomic gold in it to actually keep up with the aging process with the telomerase. So that's why we would have needed to create a supplement. The monatomic gold or white powder gold supplement was to keep up with that process. If the goal was to try to live a long time, if we were trying to live to 120 years or past the 120 years, that's something that we would have had to do is supplement the food for the telomerase.
Wow, man! What a wealth of research you have. This is awesome. I guess, is there anything other structures? Is it like other machines for making monatomic gold? We have references of it in other texts as well. Maybe go into that a little bit before we close up.
Yeah. Honestly, if you try to go outside of the pyramid, you're really not going to find a whole lot. You're going to find some mention of it in the Temple of Karnak, where you see people consuming it. But the whole point, I wouldn't say the whole point, I guess, is probably the bad, but one of the biggest thorns in my side is that you're not actually able to find it in a whole lot of different places, like in temples and stuff like that. But here's something that here's a seed that I would like to plant for you and your listeners. And that is that if you think back to one of the most venerated structures in Freemasonry, one of the things that they preach about and they talk about, you're talking about Enoch would be one thing that they talk about. And another thing is Solomon's Temple. Okay, they worship Solomon's Temple, and it's not that they worship the structure. What they're worshiping, and this is something that you're probably more familiar with Freemasonry and geometry, but they worship the math. Yeah. They worship the idea of your ability to get to use math or sacred geometry to reach certain conclusions. And using sacred geometry, Solomon was able to create his temple. And I think, and this is just something that I'm going to send out there, and people can look this up on their own, and maybe this is something I'll come back to later. But I think that Solomon's temple was doing two different things. I think, one, they were able to make it inside their temple, make the white powder gold inside that temple. And then the second thing is, I think that somewhere in that geometry, and James, this is where I need your help, somewhere in that geometry, it shows us how to make the perfect recipe. It has the perfect recipe for monatomic gold hidden in that geometry in the Solomon's temple. So,
wow. Well, the gauntlet has been laid down. You know me and geometry. I've showed you some geometry and stuff, and I hope you pick the flag up and carry it as well for the sacred geometry. And the geometry is encoded all around the earth, ancient structures. I mean, it's an esoteric science in a way, sacred geometry. But it's what the Masonic orders use. I mean, while we're on the Masonic orders, I mean, do you think that the global financial elite, who's linked with Masonic orders and like to control the world with their gold reserves, and this obsession with gold as the base currency, do you think these guys know about this stuff? They know about everything else in ancient Egypt, and they worship ancient Egypt. They worship the ideals and the concepts of ancient Egypt and Solomon's temple. And they even have rituals for Solomon.
It's going to be speculation, of course. But I would think that somewhere along the way, they know something, okay? I don't know where they're hiding this information. I don't know which structure, which ceremony, or which ritual is actually going to keep this specific secret. Maybe it's in a little of everything. I don't know, but I do think that the either naturally or unnaturally hidden into the Masonic order is this white powder gold somehow. And the funny thing is I don't even think that most of them know it. I don't think that they're actively hiding this. I just think that there's only a certain few people that would be high up the food chain that would actually have this information. I wouldn't even say they have all of the answers to this, but I think they have some of it. And if you take that into consideration and then kind of sprinkle all of these high-level Freemasons around the world and put them in places of power and political power and financial power, like we see them today, I would say that they've taken this knowledge with them into their professions, into their careers, into their family, into the government, and they are probably, unbeknownst to us, promulgating some of these ideas throughout the hierarchy that they are controlling. So, it's really hard to say exactly what's going on there, but it's very similar to what I was saying before. There's a connection there. There's a connection between why we are worshiping gold, so to speak, through the financial system. A lot of people argue, well, it's fractional lending. It's not really based on gold. But the thing is that, the Federal Reserve is called the Federal Reserve because it used to be based on the reserves of gold. Now, yes, we've taken that and ran with it and created a fractionalized view of that, and now we're lending money based on gold that we used to have, as well as lending money, actually promulgating our currency based on the idea of lending money and the fact that you're depositing money into the bank, and then we're going to say, okay, now we're going to give these banks permission to lend 10 times that amount. But here's the thing. Even though you're going to find these answers in the fractional lending system where they've created their own rules of you can lend 10 times more than what you deposit, what you'll find, and this is something that you'll want to take a look at in S. Jason Cunningham's book, Smoke and Mirrors, is that some of these banks were breaking their own rules. I mean, not only was the Federal Reserve quietly saying that we're going to lend money 10 times based on your deposit, which could be based on the gold deposit or your paper money deposit, either way, it doesn't really matter. Not only were they doing that, but what you'll find is that the people who are still alive today, so to speak, in the financial world, the largest banks that survived the crash, were the worst offenders of their own rules. And you'll see that large companies like Chase, Manhattan, Goldman Sachs, they were actually lending money on a fractional basis that were in the hundreds to one, not just 10 to one, but hundreds to one.
Wow.
So when you see stuff like that, where they're breaking their own rules, they're writing their own rules and then breaking their own rules, it's frustrating for people like you and I and the listeners at a minimum. But then the question is, well, where did the idea of the gold reserve go? Why can't we go back to that? And so there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, no pun intended, out there saying, okay, yes, it's a fractional lending system, but yet the same people who are creating the rules with the fractional lending are hoarding gold. They are accumulating gold faster than we can even think it imaginable. They are, and yet they're also manipulating the price of gold and keeping it down, which that's another thing I don't really understand how they're able to do that. But I guess if you know, as they say, he who has the gold makes all the rules. Well, if they're accumulating gold and they're continuing to keep the price low, they're just allowing themselves to buy more and more of it at a cheaper and cheaper price based on inflation. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. It's kind of off topic. But, you know, my point is these are just questions that need to be asked. And when you're finding stuff like this with ancient structures that are kind of venerated and the information is controlled through symbolism and the occult through Freemasonry and other secret societies, what you're finding is that I think they know what's going on with this. Do they know what to do with it? Maybe, maybe not. Are they just doing what they're told? Again, maybe, maybe not. But my opinion is that their goal is to accumulate the gold, and they would probably like to get their hands on some white powder gold. I think that's probably something high on their list once they figure out, if they don't already know, the benefits to its longevity and its health benefits and stuff like that. I think you're going to see gold start to go up here once that information becomes a little bit more mainstream. But on the back end of this, in the back room, the back office, they just know that gold has something to do with it and that they're hoarding it. What they do with it after that, do they even know? Who knows? But if you have it to begin with, then you're in a better position to do something with it, in my opinion.
Spencer, let me jump in there. I haven't even asked you your website yet. Please tell the listeners where we can get a copy of your book, and tell us the website for the book and how we can get a hold of you and find out more information.
Oh, sure. One thing that you can do if you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is @realtimetruth, all one word. I definitely welcome a conversation on there. It's always interesting. Sometimes I run into some new leads that way. But if you want to get the book, you can either find it on Amazon, The Great Pyramid, a factory for monatomic gold. And you can also get it directly from me at my website at www.pyramidfactory.net. Pyramidfactory.net. And you can either get it, again, a link to Amazon there or directly from me. And then there's also a little teaser video preview on there, which, hey, if you're watching this video, you know more than what's on there. But hopefully I didn't spoil my book too much for people to not want to go get it.
It's a fascinating book, Spencer. It's a fascinating book, and it's something you would read a couple of times before you could, really get grips on it. I mean, I spoke to Michael Tellinger since I spoke to you last, and I haven't aired the show yet, but Michael Tellinger is obviously, researching the gold thing as well from many different angles. But, I like his new philosophy of Ubuntu. Do you follow that? Would you like to see us get away from the gold system?
It's almost kind of like you fight fire with fire is the stance I'm having now, because I'm still kind of stuck in the idea, since it's helped me so much with my health. I would really like to see us get away from a monetary system as we see it today. Do I think we should go to an asset-based system like gold? I don't think we should do that as well, because that's also creating a lot of problems with hoarding and hierarchical systems. And I haven't followed a lot of the details with the Ubuntu, but I like where he's going with it, and I want to know more. But man, I really like his archaeological style, though. Man, a lot of his theories are just amazing. And his Slave Species of the Gods, I mean, great book. I recommend anybody read that book.
For sure. Okay, so I mean, what's somebody going to get from reading your book? I mean, what do you have an agenda for somebody to kind of grip something, get some message in the book, or is it? I mean, some people just write books to put the information in, and people will grab it if they not. Or do you have some sort of a philosophy that you want people to take away? Or
well, if it's okay with you, I would like to kind of get away and on a note where I read kind of like the last part of my book. It's like a paragraph, and in this paragraph, I'm talking about. I'm trying to kickstart someone's imagination and try to get people off the couch to do something about learning where the truth is.
Beautiful.
So if you have a second, I can just go ahead and read.
We've got a few minutes before we end up, so yeah, please do.
Okay. What can happen if we finally say enough is enough is that something will be set in motion by ourselves for great change. It will be the greatest change our species has ever experienced. It will be in the form of a mass consciousness shift. It starts as a movement to extricate ourselves from the slave system, but from there, we can decide who we want to be. The possibilities are endless. So I ask you, who do you want to be? No one else can be allowed to answer this question but you.
Wow. Powerful stuff, brother. Powerful stuff. Spencer, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Have you anything you want to finish up on? Is there anything else you want to say that I haven't asked you? Have you got any direction you want to talk about where you want to go, or is this a kickstart for you as well?
Well, this is the beginning, and do I know where this is going to go? I don't really know where this is going to go. But when I'm running into people such as yourself, with some of the stuff that you're researching with megaliths and monoliths and Newgrange, I'm running into people who are like-minded. They're not caught up in the dogma of academia, where I'll be honest with you. I mean, if I had this same interest of the pyramids with this amount of passion, 15, 20 years ago, when I was trying to choose where I was going to go to college and what my degree was going to be in and what I was going to pursue, I probably would have never even come to this conclusion, because I would have been locked into the same box that all the Egyptologists are locked into. I would have taken it so seriously back then that I would have been caught up in the museum and not really tried to understand the purpose behind all these structures. That's the thing that really kind of burns my hide right now, is that you have all of these amazing structures that have been sitting out in the open for everyone to see for thousands of years, but yet we're caught up in how they were built and when they were built. But the problem is that there's not even a lot of evidence that we're using today to identify the fact that they were built in the pharaonic cycle. It really irritates me to see that we're locked up in that. But you know what? It's people like you and John West and the Michael Tellingers of the world and the John Hancocks of the world. It's up to you guys to help bring this information to the light. And it's just, I'm honored to actually be part of that group that has spoken with you about this, because, I'm just a newcomer to the group. But, I feel like I have a pretty big piece of the puzzle here that I want to try to integrate. And I'm just saying, hey guys, let me into the clubhouse. It's time to have a new conversation.
Hey Spencer, brother, you've made a nice entrance. You've made an important entrance, and the website is pyramidfactory.net. Check it out. Get a copy of the book. It's a must-read if you like ancient Egypt, if you like alternative history, you like alternative science. It's a must-read. I think it's incredibly important, Spencer. I really love it. I really, really do. And I like it for many reasons. One more so than that, it's a prolifically researched book. I just know from talking to you on the show that you spent some time with this, and nobody will take that away from you, Spencer, that you have put your heart and soul into this, and that's the sign of a good author, and it's a must-read. And I mean, I love the book, and I really, really do, and it's been an awesome to have you on the show. I'm going to leave it at that, Spencer, and I just hope you get some feedback from this and see what happens, and I wish you all the best, and I hope to see the next book on the go.
Well, thank you. Hope to talk to you soon.
Okay, buddy, you take care. I met Monatomic Gold for a variety of reasons, and so it's something I'm slightly familiar with. I'm not an expert on, and I don't think a lot of the listeners will be experts. But a lot of people are kind of familiar with it. But it's like everything in the alternative history that people get these names thrown about and don't really grasp what this whole stuff is. So, I mean, give us a definition of monatomic gold, Spencer. I mean, what is this stuff like? I know what it is, but for the listeners too, we want to understand what this stuff is. So give us the science of this stuff.
Well, it actually goes by several different names. People who are familiar with it, monoatomic gold seems to be the title that I found on my own as I was researching it. The element gold, of course, goes by AU on the periodic table, and it's a very inert substance. It's very difficult to get it to react with anything else. It doesn't corrode on its own. So if you want to do something with it, you have to have some purpose. But some of the names that you would find it called would be, of course, monoatomic gold, monatomic gold, white powder gold is another one. Ormus gold would be another one. And then, of course, the ancient Egyptian term for it would be mufkat, which would be MFKZT. And we typically like to put it in all capital letters. And what that word actually means is, what then is it? And that, that raises questions all on its own, that why would the Egyptians give it a question instead of a title? So I found that quite interesting as I was going along. But basically, the way you make monoatomic gold, because you kind of need to make it, it doesn't just appear on its own naturally. But what you do is you start with a fairly large molecular cluster of several atoms that are held together by metal bonds or metallic bonds. And what you want to do is you want to try to break apart some of these bonds, these metallic bonds, that give it its metallic property. If you notice, with most 24 karat gold, what you can do is you can actually hammer out an ounce of gold into several hundred square feet of thin flakes, or as what we would call gold leaf. And it's such a thin, malleable material that you can coat large surface areas with it. It's pretty amazing. But once you break it down and get it out of that metallic state, it tends to try to take on some very strange properties, not unlike stone or ceramic of some kind. And if you grind it up into a powder, it's even lighter and fluffier than talcum powder. So you're taking something that's one of the heaviest elements on the periodic table, and you're grinding it up, breaking it up, and getting rid of the metallic bonds. And now all of a sudden, it kind of floats around, and it has its own anti-magnetic properties, anti-gravitic properties. So it has some very, very strange properties once you get it out of that metallic state. And in order to do that, what you have to do is you have to take it from a large crystal, which would be somewhere around 20 to 30 atoms in one molecule, that can be considered a metallic property crystal of gold. And then you break it up into as close as you can get to one atom at a time, while it's either suspended or just in a powder state. And it's very difficult to do that. It's not something that's easy to do. And another thing that's interesting about it is that once it's in that state, it's very difficult to test whether or not it is actually gold. You need some very special equipment to do so. And that's something that David Hudson, in his research, was able to identify. So all of these things kind of caught my attention as, wow, this is something special. You're taking something that's a noble metal and is very inert and uncorrosive or non-corrosive, and you're making it into a very special substance that has its own unique properties that have nothing to do with its original state.
Wow, I mean, just from a scientist's perspective, I mean, just even in terms of just the raw science, I mean, it's such a special substance like gold on its own in its metal state. I mean, in electronics industry, I mean, if we could make, all our circuit boards out of gold, it would be better. It's just expensive, but this stuff doesn't decay. All the gold that's in existence from ancient times is still in existence today. It doesn't decay. It's bizarre, I think my first route into this was the work of Lawrence Gardner, which I know you're familiar with, and I maybe just talk a little bit about him. Has he inspired you in any way? Because he's the one that I remember the muff cut from, and I think Lawrence, his presentation, fascinating as it is. I think it's still on YouTube. I welcome the listeners to look it up, but that was one of the first times I heard about monatomic gold, and I went, this is something to research. This is fascinating, and I've had a variety of people on the show now, and a lot of people try to produce this stuff. Maybe just tell us about Lawrence. Has he influenced you in any way, or?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I actually was not introduced to Lawrence's work until the tail end of putting this whole thing together. I actually discovered him as I was coming up with the title for the book, and I was almost done with the book as I discovered him. And I found some YouTube videos that you were touching on, and I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in this subject. You need to watch some of his videos if you can't get his book. His book is quite expensive. I actually looked it up. It's like $90-something for even a used paperback, but that's because it's a collector's item now due to his passing. But and of course, we wouldn't expect to see any more work coming from him, and that's going to cause something like that is considered to be a work of art, in my opinion, to go up in price. So it's actually on my list of books to read right now. I wish I would have been introduced to his work ahead of time, but there are other people that are involved in this field that I wouldn't say are quite as knowledgeable as Lawrence Gardner, but quite close. And
Greetings, everybody around the world, wherever you may be. You're very welcome to this edition of Capricorn TV. This is your host, James Swagger, and in just a moment, I'm going to be talking to Spencer L. Cross about Monatomic Gold for about an hour or so. And this is a new platform for me. Capricorn TV will be out in the field interviewing authors and speakers. And like today, we'll also be doing video call interviews. Been looking forward to this one for quite a while now. Spencer L. Cross has wrote an awesome book. He's going to tell us all about it. Before we get into that, you can head over to jamesswagger.com. You'll find the links there for Capricorn TV and radio, dedicated web pages. Everything I do is hosted there. All the social media links are there for Capricorn TV and radio. So, let me tell you about today's author. Spencer Cross is the author of The Great Pyramid, A Factory for Monatomic Gold, as well as a contributor to The Approaching Singularity, The Genesis of Creation by S. Jason Cunningham. Cross was a real estate investor up until July 2012, when he was thrust into the field of alternative history after receiving information in his dream state that was so crucial to understanding the soul's journey through time and space. It's at this point he quickly divested out of his entire real estate portfolio to free himself up to the pursuit and truth of humanity's past and its potential future. The subject of the Great Pyramid of Giza has intrigued Cross since he was a boy. When in 92, he visited Egypt with his family. After his visit to the Giza, a mystery of the pyramid began to splinter in his mind, which captivated and enthralled him to this day. A breakthrough came through when Cross was researching an amazing substance called monatomic gold, or white powder gold. What he soon discovered was the same fundamental requirements necessary for the chemical reaction in breaking down large gold molecules into gold nanoclusters, were all present in the design of the Great Pyramid. Cross has combined evidence from several popular modern theories to demonstrate this amazing series of reactions, and in the book he presents circumstantial evidence for why this substance was being manufactured, and how and why it is beneficial to all of us. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Welcome to Capricorn TV, Spencer.
Well, thanks, James. Thank you for having me today. I'm very excited. This is my first interview, so congratulations to you for being the first to interview me, and please bear with me while I knock the rust up as we go.
No problem, brother, no problem. I've spoken a couple of times to you, Spencer. You're a lovely guy. I love what you're doing. I love your research. it's cutting edge. It's nice to see somebody being thrust into the world of alternative history. I think that's what happens to all alternative historians, Spencer. You just get thrust into it for some bizarre quirk of fate or circumstance. Every alternative historian I speak to, it's like it's not what they wanted to do, it's not what they planned to do, and as a result, they end up doing it for some strange reason. But I will say I've had a few authors on the show, Capricorn Radio. Today we're on Capricorn TV for its first launch, but on the radio shows I've had a few authors talking.
Monthly payment to go towards medication is quite a daunting task, or even a mortgage payment. I mean, it was significant, and it really hit me hard in the wallet.
You need to move to the UK, Spencer. We got free medical over here.
Hey, apparently we're going down that route too, but I'll follow up on that in just a second. But as what I realized is when I first was paying for this, it was about $50 a month. And then as the Obamacare situation started to rear its nice, pretty head, it got more and more expensive with every single time that insurance was renewed, because they just didn't want to carry people who on the insurance plan that had this affliction, because they knew that the prescription was too expensive. So I started doing some research on, what could I do that would be an alternative treatment to this, because I honestly could not afford to pay this by the time that it would be, coming completely out of pocket. So what I found was something called turmeric root. And turmeric root was an anti-inflammatory, and that's a very similar treatment to what this was, which was basically a concentrated ibuprofen with a special casing around it to make sure that it would survive the passage through the stomach. So after taking turmeric, I noticed that I was starting to heal a little bit more, and I would heal more than I would with the prescription. So I switched completely over, stopped taking the prescription altogether, which is by my doctor. He told me that I would never stop taking this medicine and that there was no alternative. So after I started taking the turmeric, I started to see some significant results. My symptoms were starting to go away. They weren't completely gone, but they started to go away.
Sure.
But then the turmeric started to get expensive because I was trying to take an extract, and the extract is quite expensive as well. So then it kind of led me further down the rabbit hole of the holistic health, and that is when I stumbled on Monatomic Gold and all of its anti-inflammatory properties as well. Wow. And so I made that switch. I switched from the turmeric to the Monatomic Gold, and I bought a naturally occurring Monatomic Gold from a meteorite impact.
So this is a personal journey for you.
It really was. It really was, and it continues to be a personal journey with me, as we'll get into it in just a minute. But yes, it was personal, and it started with my own personal health. And when I finally did make that switch, what I did was I stopped taking the turmeric. So it was like, I stopped taking the prescription, and then I stopped taking the turmeric, and then flipped all the way over to the Monatomic Gold, which occurred naturally from meteorite impact zones. And it was quite an energetic experience, to say the least. I mean, it was, not only did it alleviate my symptoms completely within 2 weeks of taking it. I mean, I was taking a significant amount. I mean, I did found out, like, okay, well, what's the maximum amount I can take without, having any side effects? You can come to the same conclusions that I have without having to use his work. But he is an amazing supplement to this research, and I would definitely I would recommend anyone reading his book as well as taking a look at his videos. But he's the one that I identified that muff cut was highly popular back in ancient times in Egypt, and you'll find that he's the one that identified that the triangle, and this is something that we'll touch on later, but the triangle cone sitting in a dish in some of these hieroglyphics, that is the word, or the identification for white powder gold.
Wow, fascinating. I mean, Lawrence was a very interesting character. I mean, he was, in contact with some very influential people, maybe secret societies. I'm not sure. Like, I mean, but he was in contact with some very important, influential people, very wealthy people. You know, he was, you know, involved with artifacts and rare books and dealing in all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. You know, he was you know, he was. I guess he was present of a lot of knowledge. Is what I'm trying to say. Or privileged to a lot of knowledge. You know, the ordinary soul might not be. And saying that, like, I actually have read that copy of that book. You know, it's a fascinating piece of work. You know. My important thing about Lawrence was that he's able to connect it with the ancient Egyptians, which is great, because that's why I jumped on the show for you today, Spencer, because I haven't heard anybody talk about, you know, ancient Egypt and monatomic gold until today, and this is why we're here to talk about your book. So you have my full attention, Spencer. You have my full attention today for that reason, because everybody else talks about monatomic gold and, you know, they don't really link it up in too many ways. But here we have a book today, The Great Pyramid, a factory for monatomic gold. You know, and it's wonderful. Before we get into the book, Spencer, tell me about you. Why the fascination with, I presume it's a fascination, or if not an obsession. When I get into a subject to write or research about, it's an obsession to me. It just takes over. I want to know more about it. Is it research to you? Is there a personal touch to this, or?
Well, I did not intend to write about this at all. I was just basically looking up information on my own accord, because I had some health issues starting a couple of years ago. I was diagnosed with something called ulcerative colitis, and if anyone's familiar with that, it's a very uncomfortable disease to have. It has to do with the bowels, and it's really not something fun to have. So, you know, I was kind of diagnosed with this incurable ailment, and so I started to realize that this was something that wasn't going away. And not only that, but the prescription that I was told that I needed to take almost indefinitely, called Asacol, is $600 a month. So if you can imagine, you know, a Mercedes-Benz